Yeah, no, I know. So I think we are ready to start. This is session number 3 of our founding conference. The title is Politics, Culture, and Ideology. We have 5 speakers in this particular session. So I will ask each one of them to keep the time approximately around 15 minutes. With the exception of the first speaker, Theodoros Tsagiris, who has to attend another session at the same time. He will take questions and comments immediately after he finishes his presentation, and the others, we will take the comments and the questions for everyone at the end. So the first speaker, which I invite to the floor, is Dr. Theodoros Tsagiris from the Department of Management of the University of Nicosia. He will speak about the roots of Turkish contact. Theodora, you have the floor. You need to have this either on you, next to you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to everyone who is attending this meeting, this conference, either physical present here or through the internet. Let me start by congratulating the organizers and thanking them for their invitation and for their evaluation. I'm a political scientist and a political economist by trade. So a part of my interest also expand, of course, on issues of Turkish foreign policy, which can also be seen and analyzed in this paper from an ideological point of view. Ideology is very important, and that's a greater discussion with regards to the importance it has on foreign policy. And not only because it can shape what we would call the strategic culture of states and their foreign policy mechanism, as well as priorities or fears, or something that in psychology we could call the greater political psychology of a nation and the way that it behaves, its behaviors. Several foreign policy analysts have tried to interpret a Turkish foreign policy decision in terms of syndromes. Okay, the Sevres syndrome, or other kinds of, and they use a term which is essentially psychological, which means a syndrome is basically a reaction which has been the result of trauma, of a major traumatic experience that dictates a near automatic, preordained reaction according to a specific stimulus. And that stimulus, or stimuli in plural, and that I could also use my other education as a clinical psychologist, which was my first degree. Since we talk about syndromes have a specific place in the overall psychology and overall psychopathological analysis of states, which are related, as I told before, directly connected to a trauma. The trauma which gave birth to the Sevres syndrome, which is one of the guiding principles in a way of Turkish foreign policy, was the collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War, and also what was perceived as the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire as a result of the Sevres Treaty of July 28, actually. At the time it was July 28, July 1920. Today, currently, in the Turkish political dialogue, and if you see the press and if you look at the domestic discourse in terms of Turkish foreign policy and its priorities, it's been governed by, to a certain extent when it comes to Greece, and to a lesser extent Cyprus, by historical pathology, in a way, in the sense that the major position of the opposition parties, both of the Kemalist Nationalist Party and the SCP, as well as the former sister party of the ultranationalist, the MHP, which is part of the Erdogan's coalition, then the part of that which was divided into the İyi party of Mrs. Aksener, which is basically a division of within the same ideological family. When it comes to dealing with Greece, or when it comes to dealing with Cyprus, their position and their point of view with regards to the general directions and priorities of Turkish foreign policy are almost identical. The interesting thing about what has happened, of course, and that goes back to the history and the trauma, as they would perceive it, of the 1920-1922 period, which centers around a concept of the a concept of irredentism, the Misak Milli oath, which was basically what the reaction of the first Kemalist nationalist parliament in exile that was assembled after the Treaty of Sevres in 1920, and basically declined to accept all the borders that were imposed on the collapsed Ottoman Empire as a result of the international treaties. That treaty has been part of the domestic political dialogue within Turkey when it comes to issues of foreign policy that directly affect Hellenism. And the reason behind that was that, of course, the opposition is trying to always put pressure to the government, both the nationalist, the ultra-nationalist opposition of the İYİ Party, as well as the Kemalist opposition, the westernized opposition of the SCP, to claim and present, essentially, the government as being too, and that is relatively ironic to say under current conditions, too forgiving, too accepting, and too condescending vis-a-vis what it perceives, and it's not just the government, it's also the opposition, of Greek unlawful or questionable sovereignty over specific parts of the Aegean Islands that should be, according to Turkish point of view, in one way or another demilitarized. There are different, of course, international treaties which governed the form of demilitarization of the Aegean Islands, both in the north as well as in the south, but these have nothing to do either with the claim of Turkey as it is presented, because, for example, with regards to the Antagonism Islands, which were incorporated in Greece in March 1974 with the Treaty of Paris, they did have some demilitarization elements with regards to what kind of military personnel and weapons and armaments should be present in those islands, but Turkey was not a party to that treaty. Okay, if there was one country which should actually say that Greece is violating that treaty, it's the Soviet Union, which doesn't actually exist. Turkey was not party to the treaty, and Turkey recognized the borders of the Italian Dodecanese province back in 1932, including very specific borders along the maritime routes, which Turkey, before Erdogan, before the rise of ultranationalism, is questioning after the EMEA Treaty and the so-called gray zones theory, which was developed after the 1997 Madrid MOU, which was at the time. This is something which is from the history books, but this is not something which has remained in history. It has become part and parcel of day-to-day political exchange between the government and the opposition, which has found itself into the most recent manifestation of Turkish revisionism in the Aegean, which calls into question the sovereignty of Greek islands, both in terms of treaties that Turkey has signed, 1923, and then the remilitarization of the islands after the Montreux Treaty of 1936, because these two, as far as Limnos, Samothraki, and these parts of the islands is directly related to what was the status of the straits. Once the straits were closed and Turkey became again the key holder of the straits, and it was able to militarize its presence here, at the same time this gave the role and the ability to Greece to do the same here, because this was a unified, under the Lausanne Treaty, area of demilitarization. With regards to the second part, in the Deccanese Islands, it was clear that this is something between Greece and the four winning powers of the Second World War, including Italy, which was the one who returned the Deccanese Islands to Greece. Why is that important in terms of Turkish political? And I'm saying that because this is something that the Turkish government, especially the last month, has been building more and more pressure. Not because it's going to gain anything. Actually, the Greek army is going to become stronger, and the weapons that are actually deployed in the islands and will be deployed in the islands, it will actually give rise to even more negative commentary on the part of Turkey with regards to the range and the ability of these weapons to stop the Turkish invasion fleet on its tracks across the area of the western shores of Asia Minor. The reason why he's doing it is because he's not only picking up on the requests of the opposition, but because also he expects to gain politically from this. Okay? So this has become a legitimate part of the Turkish political debate, from which both the opposition and the government are expecting to win, to profit. Okay? How did we come to that? How is that related to the overall political ideology of Erdogan and the importance of his interpretation with regards to these kind of historical events which happened almost 100 years relate to the present day? To what extent are these actual motivations, these ideological constructs, motivations of his foreign policy in the present day and in the immediate future? My thesis, my proposition is that to understand Erdogan and to understand his ideological, the way that he conducts foreign policy, is to be able to understand his own ideological roots. Understanding Erdogan's Weltanschauung, which is a German word which means the global viewpoint, his κοσμοθεωρία θα λέγαμε κατά κάποιο τρόπο στα ελληνικά. Okay? His global viewpoint is very important for any leader, but even more important for that leader in that country, in that political system. Why? Well, first and foremost, because Erdogan is not just another leader. He's not a prime minister who's been winning one election after the other and then became president within an established political system like any Western leader. He's not a Western leader. He's not any Western leader. He's not even any Turkish leader. He has rose to a political position of prominence and power, which is unprecedented since the founder of the Republic, Kemal Atatürk himself. So he's not just a leader. He is the anti-Atatürk, essentially. And he's not just an alternative to Atatürk. He is the one who has, to a very large extent, supplanted Kemalism, uprooted Kemalism, and has taken and conserved only the nationalist components of Kemalist ideology within his own ideology, which I would submit to you is called Erdoganism, as we would call Kemalism. So what is Erdoganism and why is it important? Erdoganism is very important because it is the guiding principles of a person who is and of himself the father of modern Turkey, the father of Islamist Turkey. So understanding his ideological point of view is crucial, not only because he is the unquestionable leader of a country who has of whose the major economic expansion and now contraction he's been overseeing for almost 20 years. Okay, if he wins the next election, or even if he doesn't win the next election, any child who is below 19 years old in Turkey, he would have known only one leader. So we have an entire generation of Turks who has come of age under Erdogan. Okay? So he's not any other leader. So since he's not any other leader, and the second important issue which describes the need to understand that his ideology is the political system he has created. In his process of dismantling and uprooting Kemalism, and through the bureaucratic, judiciary, military, police state Kemalism had established in order to be able to do that, which is basically what? To be able to intervene into the political system to carry on the legacy. Remember, the military and the judiciary was always the custodian of Kemalist ideology and Kemalist legacy. And it was not just a theoretical construct, it had very practical expressions, okay? And these practical expressions are Turkey's modern political history, which continued even after, either directly, coup d'etat, 3 of them, indirectly, a pronunciamento of 1997, the judiciary involvement of the military in 2006, and of course, the last more significant dynamic reaction against against the establishment of Erdoganism, which was this, okay? The failed coup of 2016, which was condemned, of course, by even Kemal's own opponents, epigons, but they gave rise to something very, very different. And that's the other reason why Erdoganism is important to understand not only the political evolution of Turkey, but its own foreign policy, which is that Erdogan has established a new system which looks like this. Okay? It is a unipolar system where at the center of power you have the presidency. And that is a center of power which has been democratically legitimized through the referendum of 2017, even though it was only a marginal success. But according to the letter of the law, most of the country, or a little bit more than half of the country, accepted it, which has created a very, very different structure. You don't have a separation of powers. You have conocentric circles at the center of which you have only the president of the republic. He appoints the government, okay, provided he has the majority of the parliament. There is no prime minister, okay? He can take over the legislative process. What kind of a revolutionary is he? Well, to look back to his own ideology, and his ideology are basically made up of two major roots. The first one is Erbakan, and Erbakan's Milli Görüş understanding, which is the manifesto of political Islam in Turkey. I submit to you that Erdogan is an Islamic revolutionary, not in the form of an Islamic revolution which took place in Iran, but in a much more subtle way, which goes back into the writings of Erbakan's political manifesto and the Milli Görüş movement of 1969, which essentially equates Erbakan, and the cycle of political Islamists to the equivalent Thank you. Included AKP into the political process, made it part of electoral politics, and that also distinguished it from the other strain, the second strain of Erdoganist ideology, which is Necip Fazil Kizilkürek's militant ideology of Turkish nationalism, of ultra-nationalism, which is very close to political Islam, as it is perceived in Turkey, which is anti-Western, anti-Semitic, and anti-democratic, and goes back to their interpretation of a huge conspiracy which led to the destruction of the Ottoman Empire after Abdul Hamid II's fall. And I could explain that more if we have more time. But more importantly, what Kizilkürek was, he was a much more violent revolutionary in the sense that he, by the way, is the ideological father of MHP. He was the ideologue behind Alparslan Türkeş. Okay? And I remind you, this is a Cypriot audience, that the coalition government which took the decision to invade Cyprus was made up of three parties: Ecevit, CHP, Alparslan Türkeş, and Erbakan, in their ideological positions of the time. So his position, by the way, is a position of synthesis between Islam and political Islam on the one side, and of Turkish irredentism and nationalism on the other. The geographical expressions of how these ideologies morphed can be seen here, okay? Because they both agree on the need to reestablish the Misak Milli. They both agree to the need to reestablish the Ottoman Empire as a way of stabilizing the entire region in the wider Middle East and beyond, in the Turkish occupied, in the Turkish populated, as they would perceive them, Turkish, of course, areas in the former Soviet Union. And more importantly, they agree and codify a foreign policy doctrine of irredentism, which can be seen here as the trauma of not only of the Sèvres Treaty, but as a trauma of the Lausanne Treaty. They see Lausanne as a traumatic experience. New Turkish imperialist revisionism sees Lausanne, not Sèvres, Lausanne as a traumatic experience. This is the difference, historically speaking. This is the difference. And this has been a major guiding principle of Turkish foreign policy after 2011. The marriage between the MHP and AKP has been ideologically very close to the synthesis I've been describing. And you see it instrumentalized as a policy both of land grabbing and of extension and expansion of its ability to control borders directly into areas around Turkish immediate periphery, which goes into the borders of the Misak Milli and these areas. And you see that operationalized in Syria, here, here, and here. In Iraq, which many people don't understand, Turkey has been occupying parts of northern Iraq and building 50 military bases around the areas which now it has direct control over with the acquiescence of the KRG. You can see that here in more detail. And of course, at the end, in land and on seas, through the Mavi Vatan doctrine, what everybody knows. If you want one map which encapsulates all of it, this is the last, which describes the direction of Turkish foreign policy. Everything else has been a ways of maneuvering, essentially. And we've seen that, we've seen over the last year and a half, this kind taking place around the Middle East. These are not a strategic shift. These were basically tactical maneuvers to get the Americans to agree in only one major issue, and the Turkish military embargo. Okay, that's the final point. And we can discuss whether he can make it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking more of your time.
If there is any comment or question, you can take it now, because he's presenting another analysis.
Sorry, just a short question. Sooner or later, Erdogan will fall. should be physical or political. Yes. Question is that, what is your prediction in relation to the day after the battle? The same regime be sustained, or will it be something else?
Well, yeah, it's a very, very difficult and very important question. I don't think that Erdogan is going to go politically. His layers or his control over the layers of power in Turkey are too absolute for him to just leave because he's going to lose an election. He controls the judiciary, he controls the police. It would be very, very difficult for him not to rig the election or to have a peaceful transition. It would be difficult for him to accept that unless he's given a deal like the one that Putin gave Yeltsin back in 2000. And that would be a big question mark because the power that Erdogan has built and the wealth that Erdogan has built over the last 20 years are not even comparable to what Yeltsin did to Russia for the 8 years he governed. So I don't see him living through the political process. We don't know when Allah is going to call him back to paradise as where he would like to go. But what he's done to Turkey is not going to go away. The regime is most likely to survive by a different configuration of power through a different candidate. They will have to figure it out themselves. But there is no unified opposition to uproot and dethrone AKP. And it will be, in my humble point of view, even if Erdogan is replaced by a coalition, because it's going to be a coalition again, of SCP, the Kemalists, and İYİ Partisi, we're going to see very, very, as far as Greece and Cyprus is concerned, we're going to see very much of the same. Nothing's going to change. You may have different changes in the regional aspects of his foreign policy, but not as a core issue that we are covering. And I think that this synthesis between Erdoganism, the synthesis of Erdogan's Islamist and ultranationalist ideology is going to remain at the core, even of the next coalition government, because of Aksener and because of the İYİ Partisi and because of the roots of Erdoganism in the society. So what he's created is not going to go away. It's not going to go away because he's going to lose one election. There you go.
Thank you very much, Theodore. I think we can now move.
Honorable participants, as it is well known, since the mid of the past decade, Turkey and Russia have maintained a fruitful dialogue and cooperation on many open fronts, and that despite their long-lasting differences. The search for cooperation began amid the biggest crisis of the last period in the Russian-Turkish relations. That is the shooting down of a Russian fighter jet in Syria, and it intensified after the failed coup attempt in Turkey. The multi-level cooperation between Turkey and Russia is described by modern analysts as conflictual or adversary. Eric Axel describes the process of conflictual cooperation as a coordination attempt between contradictory, varying understandings. In this sense, different individuals or groups attempt to build their cooperation based on their common causes. observations and findings regarding the establishment of the concept of conflictual cooperation between individuals may also be applied in the analysis of the recent Turkish-Russian relations that indeed fit the description of adversary or conflictual cooperation. Going against the odds, the two Black Sea neighboring countries managed to coordinate their differences and varying understandings. As we know, after the shooting down of a Russian fighter plane by the Turkish Air Force on the Turkish-Syrian border in 2015, Ankara and Moscow managed to overcome the bad blood between them and develop channels of communication and cooperation on various open fronts. In 2016, with Moscow's consent, Ankara began its military operations in Syria's northern territories. Shortly after, in 2017, Turkey began the process of getting a Russian S-400 missile air defense system. A few years later, in 2020, Russia and Turkey worked together to settle the Karabakh issue. At the same time, the cooperation of the two countries in the fields of economy, tourism, and energy continued, and it came today. It arrived to these days, with Russia always undertaking the task of building Turkey's first nuclear plant in Akkuyu. All this happened despite the differences between the two countries in the different fronts, such as Syria, Ukraine, Libya, and of course Turkey's NATO membership related issues. As I said, when it comes to the present crisis in relations between Turkey and the West, the lesson to be learned from the Turkish-Russian partnership is that the most important aspect of bilateral relations is their capacity to overcome their differences. Because exactly this reality, the development of the Turkish-Russian conflictual cooperation between the years 2060 and today, 2022, through the lens of the Turkish magazine Kriter. I choose 2016 as the starting point of my research since a few months past the shooting down of the Russian fighter jet and the failed coup attempt in Turkey. And Ankara and Moscow, after these very important developments, choose to turn the page in their bilateral relations and focus on opportunities for cooperation. The Kriter in Turkish means criterion, from the Greek kriterio, as we read on its official website, is a monthly magazine published by the Foundation for Political, Economical, and Social Research Center, SETA, to set out the criteria for the new era in which Turkey is struggling to recover and stand up. The first issue of the magazine was released in 2016, just 3 or 4 weeks before the failed coup. The SETA is a think tank based in Ankara, which was established in 2006. The think tank, which has offices in Istanbul, Washington, and Cairo, analyzes on Turkey's political, economic, and foreign policy, and it is well known for its close relations with the conservative government of Turkey. The intriguing element, the very interesting element in the Turkish-Russian conflictual cooperation is that during the last 6 years, their bilateral relationship developed despite their opposing views and a lack of trust in many issues. Kriter's archive sheds light to the significant differences of the two sides in the Syrian crisis. Back in May 2016, the magazine published an article accusing Moscow of civilian massacres carried out by Russians, Iranians, and Lebanon's Hezbollah's soldiers who fought alongside the Assad administration. According to the article's author, Russia's stance in the Syrian crisis is duplicitous. Russia only pretends to seek a political solution at the negotiations table through its relationship with Turkey, when in fact she has actually helped the Syrian regime to take over almost the entire country. Also, the magazine criticized Moscow for its support of the Kurdish separatist autonomy movement, which Turkey has branded as a terrorist organization, stating that, I quote, "The possible consolidation of the PYD, Syria's Democratic Union Party, in northern Syria will lead to the PKK directly or indirectly gaining access to the sophisticated weapons systems from the United States and Russia, and carrying out other acts of terrorism against Turkey." Moreover, Kriter has focused on the two countries' significant differences on other fronts. For instance, the magazine argued that Russia is a major competitor of Turkey on the geopolitical and energy map of the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. In this context, the magazine has put forth the view that Russian and Turkish interests are at odds in Caucasus, Libya, and Africa. Also, just months ago, in 2022, Kriter criticized Moscow on the grounds that, I quote, "After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there was a settled balance and stability in the Black Sea. In 2008, shook the balance in Moscow's favor, while the annexation of Crimea in 2014 created a serious imbalance in favor of Russia and against other coastal countries." Surprise, surprise. The other coastal countries, one of them is Turkey, of course. In other words, Kriter has viewed Russia's renewed ambition to become a big power as a threat against the national security of Turkey and the security of the West, and especially the military alliance in which Turkey participates since 1952. To offer some examples from Kriter's archive, I will discuss here some selected articles published between 2016 and 2022, which cover several international developments that influence the Turkish-Russian conflictual cooperation. Studying Kriter's archive, it is made evident that during the last 6 years, the two countries have many contradictory understandings, point of view, and engagements in many fronts, from Ukraine to Caucasus, Syria, and Libya. Nevertheless, according to the magazine, the two countries have worked to bridge the gap between them. These efforts began in the aftermath of the failed coup attempt in Turkey, with the launch of the Turkish military plans for the northern part of Syria. At the beginning of this period, in June 2016, just weeks before the failed coup, the magazine stressed the following, which I quote, "The rationalization will have significant consequences. Both Turkey and Russia suffered from the tensions. Economically, many sectors, especially tourism, were badly affected. Diplomatically, both sides were unable to discuss the Syrian issue. Now it's time to get over it. But more importantly, an engagement will have a serious security dimension. Syria is a region that produces insecurity. If a solution is desired, the parties should set aside their disagreements. Soon after this article, just weeks after, Ankara and Moscow reached an understanding regarding the coordination of the deployment of Turkish troops in Syrian territory, which was framed by the face-to-face meetings of President Erdogan and Putin. A few weeks after this publication, Turkey invaded Syria and started to create a buffer zone. During the same period, the magazine also focused on the strengthening of the Turkish-Russian relations in the fields of economy and energy. In relation with the latter, the magazine underlined the importance of the construction of Turkey's first nuclear plant by Russia. And the assassination of the Russian ambassador in late 2016 in Ankara did not overshadow the enthusiasm of the magazine's articles regarding the new Russian-Turkish dialogue. I have a quote, I'm going to bypass it, but it is very interesting about the point of view of Ankara regarding the S-400 system. And during the same period with this article, with this quote, we have Kriter saying that we are facing an evolution and revolution in our relations with Moscow. In the following years, although Ankara and Moscow occasionally found themselves on different sides of rival camps, as they were, for example, in the case of Libyan crisis, the multidimensional Turkish-Russian conflictual cooperation continued. As an example, we have Karabakh War, and the magazine declaring that the current status quo is unsustainable, and we are going to collaborate with Russia in order to find a solution. Adding this to this point, accepting the fortification of Moscow's and Ankara's position in Caucasus as a win-win development, the Kriter, the magazine, put forth the argument that Russia bears valid claims in the Ukrainian crisis, despite of Ankara's military assistance to Kiev. And I quote, it's a very short quote, "For Russia, the Black Sea basin is vital. Pipelines and energy transfer, national security and trade volume in the region make Black Sea indispensable for Russia. The competition in the region, the increase of Western or Atlantic influence is clearly seen in Moscow as a security threat." And to sum up, based on the above, I put today forth the idea that there is a direct link, direct line between the opinion expressed in Kriter's articles and Ankara's thoughts of the Turkish-Russian relations during the last 6 years. Although the major powers of the Black Sea have conflicting understandings and plans for several parts of this area, they are eager to develop a fruitful collaboration. This observation, for closing up my presentation, raises, I think, a very interesting, intriguing question. What kind of factors bring Turkey and Russia together despite their differences? To borrow Axel's question about conflictual cooperation, why Moscow and Ankara attempt to coordinate their contradictory agendas? The magazine, The Kriter, offers us an answer to this crucial question based on Ankara's perspective, always. According to the magazine's columnist, in the 21st century, Russia and Turkey show an increased interest of cooperation in a series of fields that first and foremost bring profits, economic and diplomatic profits to the both sides. For instance, the fields of energy, tourism, and economy offer new opportunities for deepening bilateral cooperation. At the same time, both countries share a lack of understanding with the West, and especially United States of America. This pushed the two countries into searching for an alternative partnership. Additionally, the coalitions formed by other powers and the international community's failure to show its support for the Russian and Turkish thesis are also factors that push the two countries together. For instance, the USA's cooperation with the Syrian Kurds and the reaction of the US and Western allies to the 2016 failed coup in Turkey have caused the Turkish government's frustration. Although the recent multi-level Turkish and Russian cooperation is not new, and it is not in any case an alternative to Turkey's historical relations with the West. Nevertheless, several problems, such as the West's cold attitude towards the existing conservative government of Turkey and the Kurdish factor, brings Turkey and Russia together. I'm closing with this very interesting quote that declares Turkey has serious problems with its most important ally, the USA. I'm not going to read it, but it's very crucial because it shows us that and supports my main argument today here in this presentation. Despite their contradictions, their conflicting approaches, and historical mistrust in the Turkish and Russian bilateral relations, Ankara continues to pursue a collaboration between the two countries, aiming for the promotion of her interests in Black Sea, in Eastern Mediterranean, and in the wider region. Thank you very much.
Nicola. I will immediately invite my colleague Ioannis Kastanas for his presentation titled Inter-Orthodox Relations as a Political Argument on the Occasion of the Invasion in Ukraine. We take all the questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organization committee for the honor to accept my proposal. I chose this subject due to the recent Russian invasion in Ukraine. The Ukrainian case permits us to understand the political character of inter-Orthodox relations, and mainly the relations between Ecumenical Patriarchate and Patriarchate of Moscow or Russian Orthodox Church in the 21st century. Contrary to the Roman Catholic Church, which possesses a unified structure, in Orthodoxy a different status is presented. It compromises by a system of independent churches with hierarchical structures, the diptychs. This system of structure, known as Pentarchate, is the canonical basis of administration in Orthodox Church, a status which was modified after the foundation of newer patriarchates and autocephalous churches. These churches were ex-jurisdiction of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. However, their foundation was connected directly with the development of nationalism and the nation state, mainly in the region of the Balkans. The Russian Orthodox Church was a de facto autocephalous church from 1448. The confer of the autocephaly and of the patriarchal value was realized in 1589. It is necessary to highlight the confer of autocephaly is a complex canonical issue with political impacts. In the canon law of the Unified Church, the right to found or recognize an autocephalous church belonged to the Ecumenical Council. After the Great Schism, the convent of an Ecumenical Council is impossible. The foundation of the Patriarchate of Moscow had the consensus of the patriarchs of the East. But the rest of the newer patriarchates and autocephalous churches inquired this status by the Holy Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. This institution has the right to confer the autocephaly till a pan-Orthodox council conducts eventually a new procedure. However, throughout the history of the Orthodox Church, it is observed that the request of the autocephalous status demands the participation of the state. The local church should cooperate with the government and submit together their request. This tradition reflects the close link between state and church in Byzantine era. This formation of the rest of the newer churches is the effect of the domination of the nation state in the Balkans, succeeded the Ottoman Empire. The local church was identified with the nation. To be citizen of the nation state, one must belong to its ethnic church. Consequently, the church was obliged to serve the state and had to support the politics of its government. This phenomenon is the heresy of ethnophiletism. In order to understand the impact of religion in the current political ideology of Russia, we should focus on its historical background. It is the theory of the Third Rome which constitutes the basis of the narrative of the Russian world. However, do a first or a second Rome exist? Rome was a symbol of power and universality. It incarnated the Roman civilization. New Rome was endowed with all these characteristics. The great dream of Byzantine civilization was a universal Christian society administered by the emperor and spiritually guided by the church. After the Constantinople, Moscow cultivated the consideration of the Third Rome. According to this, Moscow was the heir of the tradition of the Eastern Roman Empire. This tradition included almost three dimensions: supremacy, universality, and an eschatological dimension. This theory, which was adopted and enforced by Tsars, was interrupted violently at the October Revolution. In order to build the post-Soviet state, the Russian authorities returned again to the theory of Third Rome. It was and still is the basis of religious policy and one of the pillars of the Russian world. This concept was dramatically developed in the Putin's era with the strong support of Patriarch Kirill. He defines the Russian world as a separate civilization which compromises Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians, as well as other non-Slavic peoples, if only they recognize the spiritual and the cultural foundation of the Russian world. Russia is not a simple country. It is heaven on earth, Holy Russia. The Orthodox Church in Ukraine follow a similar route. It remained in the jurisdiction of Patriarchate of Moscow at the moment of the collapse of USSR. Immediately then, but after the official declaration of the independence of the Republic of Ukraine, the Holy Synod of this autonomous metropolis was convened, and it asked from the Russian Orthodox Church the commencement of the procedure via decision of a to inquire the status of autocephaly. The request was rejected, and the ROC demanded the resignation of Metropolitan Filaret. In Filaret, to comply with this demand, Moscow responded with his dismissal. He did not accept this judgment and provoked a split, founding the Patriarchate of Kiev. Finally, three religious, Orthodox communities existed in Ukraine. Particularly, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine under the jurisdiction of the ROC and the two schismatic groups. Due to its presence in Ukraine, the continuity of the Russian world was confirmed, as Kiev is a holy land for Russians. Orthodox, in Kiev, Russians were baptized. Without this historical conjunction, the narrative of the Russian world, as well as the doctrine of Third Rome, were threatened. On the other hand, a unified national and autocephalous church was necessary for the establishment of the new state. The affiliation of metropolis of Kiev in the ROC did not favor the achievement of this national goal, but was rather undermining. The reason behind this is crucial to be explained. The status of an autocephalous, completely independent church was an imperative state priority. This assessment does not change the above argument about ethnophiletism. Even if such a future evolution is possible, the request to inquire the status of autocephaly is politically correct in order to build a nation state. The ecclesiastical status in Ukraine changed in October 2018. Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew accepted the appeal, Ekliton in Greece, of Filaret and Makarios, the primate of the other schismatic group, who were consequently, they and their structure inquired communion with the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Before this, Filaret and Makarios had supported the initiative of the former Ukrainian President Poroshenko to finance asking autocephaly for Ukraine. It is obvious that the interest of Poroshenko was based on political reasons too, as he wanted to enforce his position, gaining advantage in the upcoming presidential elections. Prior to the discussion of this request by the Holy Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate at the end of November 2018, the Rock countered to this perspective. Metropolitan Hilarion, former president of the Department of the External Church Relation of the Rock, attacked Bartholomew. According to this, Patriarch of Constantinople does not have the right of appeal nor the right to confer the status of autocephaly singing a tomos. The conflict between the two sees is constant. Moscow challenges the conditions of the first position in diptychs, which Constantinople has. It argues that the primacy is only a primacy of honor, pointing out that the Rock now has the great population of believers betwixt the Orthodox churches. On the contrary, the Ecumenical Patriarchate supposed that the primacy granted privileges as well as a coordinating role in Orthodoxy. In the political level, USA's government supporting the request of the Ukrainian president and his acceptance from the Ecumenical Patriarchate. The White House highlighted that it is an issue of freedom of religion, and the Ukrainian people have the right to their own independent church. The Kremlin accused the Ukrainian government that it did not respect the canonical status in Ukraine. Okay, thank you. President Putin adopted all the rhetoric of the Rock. Bartholomew, according to this opinion, was a de facto instrument of the interests of the USA in the region and nothing else. The Holy Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate ignored all these accusations and threats. It decided the conversion of a unifying synod in Kiev, and then finally granted the autocephaly to Ukraine on 6 January 2019. The response of the Rock was direct. The ecclesiastical authorities considered the autocephaly as a hostile action of Patriarchate of Constantinople. Patriarch Kirill interrupted the communion with Bartholomew. The Rock started a campaign to inform and to promote this argument, influencing the other churches as regards an eventual recognition of the new church. And the Kremlin considers the autocephaly case as an episode of the war between West and Holy Russia, a way to subordinate the Ukrainian people. Once of Putin's justification as regards the Russian invasion is the consequences of the Ukrainian autocephaly. To sum up, an oxymoron phenomenon is observed in Ukraine. The Patriarchate of Moscow considers that the Ukrainian territory belongs to its jurisdiction, while it blesses via its primate the war against its members. This oxymoron, which obviously violates the holy canons and the tradition of the Orthodox Church, only by political criteria should be explained. Thus, the Patriarchate of Moscow seems to function as a sui generis public service incorporated in the Russian public administration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yanni. We take the questions later on. Now it's Alexandre, you're still here. You can hear us. Yeah. Alexandre.
Everyone.
Okay, we can hear you. You can share the screen. Alexandros is a PhD candidate at the School of Journalism and Mass Media Studies at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and he will be discussing the title of his presentation is "The War Beyond the War, the Use of Propaganda in Social Media in the Russian-Ukraine Conflict." Alexander, you have the floor. Please try and confine the presentation in 15 minutes, something, okay?
Okay.
Can you share the screen?
Yes.
Are you sharing? Okay. Yeah, okay.
All right.
Okay. The floor is yours, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My talk today is related to a war that is sadly still ongoing, but I think it has a few interesting components for all sorts of research. So we are all more or less familiar with the developments in Ukraine. Most of us have probably seen our mobile and computer monitors being swarmed with news and posts showing war footage, images of military hardware, soldiers, etc. And of course, those very faces that have become familiar sight all of a sudden, like President Zelensky of Ukraine or the Russian MFA spokeswoman, Ms. Zakharova. Essentially, this content is mostly has its source in the official channels of communication of the two belligerent countries, Ukraine and Russia. Obviously, social media is part of these channels. So now you probably have read it somewhere. Some analysts have dubbed this as the first social media war. Now, it's true that the proportions of this war in terms of content production and engagement in the digital domain are immense, but it's not really the first social media war. If you remember, it was only 2 years ago in 2020 when Armenia and Azerbaijan would post videos on Twitter of successful military attacks. They did so through their defense ministries. In Syria, everyone used social media, the Assad government, the rebel factions, paramilitary groups. In fact, even ISIS had a very sophisticated social media strategy to promote its extremist propaganda. We saw it also in Afghanistan, we saw it in Myanmar, and other areas of conflict as well. So what do states use social media for? It's not really a novelty. Of course, they need communication channels in a peace context, let alone during war. They need to control the narrative of the conflict, justify or legitimize their actions, preserve and boost morale of soldiers and civilians, but also obscure what does not serve their purposes. Say when they suffer a defeat or when they wish to mislead their opponent. The capabilities and features of modern social media are in as much available to individuals as to institutional users. That means states, state agencies, and military entities enjoy an increased capacity to reach large audiences, to promulgate their positions, propaganda, and exert influence over a potentially limitless number of individuals. So this is a quick look at what took place right after when the invasion was launched on February the 24th. So I'll try to go quickly here. Both sides used social media from the very first day. Both sides took restrictive measures against mainstream media and social media. Russian social media were already banned in Ukraine since 2017, and the social media platforms themselves have been applying extensive moderation, blocking several accounts, mainly Russian. Let's see my research questions here. We're examining social media, official social media by Ukraine and Russia. What are the main discursive strategies used by each country? How does each belligerent frame themselves in contrast to the other? How does the current international political landscape and historical context pervade their narrative frames? And last question, does the social media setting affect the way meaning is communicated in the war context? In my study, I used critical discourse analysis and selected conceptions of the very theory of propaganda. CDA investigates language, semiotics, and discourse. It's powerful. It's a powerful qualitative tool that helps us explore ideological structures, microstructures, and macrostructures, power relations, and the political context of a given piece of communication. It takes into account the language, the medium, who uses it, why, and when. It focuses on the ways people engage with the sources of dominant actors and uncovers what is explicit, but also what is subtle, what is denoted, and what is obscured. In the process, we are able to identify some standard propaganda practices outlined by scholars such as the father of propaganda, Edward Bernays or Harold Laswell, and more modern theoreticals such as Noam Chomsky. To name some of those practices is like setting the agenda, repetition, exploitation of existing underlying perception, appeal to universal principles, and other forms of persuasion. I would like to note here that this social networking battlefield that is being shaped becomes a distinct field of warfare that goes beyond the clear-cut cyber warfare. It goes beyond cyber attacks, beyond the electronic warfare that may target the opponent's military infrastructure. It's broader and it's wider, and it's under the auspices of soft power. So I have 38 posts, half Ukrainian and half Russian, from official social media accounts. This is my preliminary corpus. They are posts containing text published directly in English, with or without visuals. They were automatically translated or that were provided with a translation. So the observation here is that there's an evident desire from both sides to address non-native audiences, and apparently they shifted to making English or bilingual posts on social media. Most prominent accounts from the Ukrainian side are those of President Zelensky. He is, as you very well know, effectively the flagship of the Ukrainian campaigns, and there's also some plentiful activity by the ministry and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine and some other institutional accounts. On the Russian side, it seems they have a more standard approach in terms of political communication. The Russian president, Vladimir Putin, does not maintain any social media accounts whatsoever with his name and title. There is an account of the Kremlin, but the bulk of social media activity comes A, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, B, Russia's embassies. The embassies and the Russian missions to the EU and the UN are very, very active and creative, one could say. Both sides seem to abide by the latest social media norms to an effective communication strategy in terms of content creation. What can lead us to desired engagement? This comes from marketing and PR practices, like the alternation between text and images and the videos, the use of plain language, the use of selfies, the so-called Velfie culture, entirely by Zelensky in our case. Everyone has seen the videos that he posts on Instagram with a building beside him in Kiev. So this is in line with the immediacy and simplicity used in modern TikTok and Instagram videos. Most of you can recall it. I'm moving on to my content now. Starting with the Ukrainian accounts, a notable frame is the direct contrast to Russia. The Ukrainians tend to assume positive and enabling traits. They portray themselves as heroes, defenders, fighters, patriots, exhibiting courage, endurance, and competency on the field. President Zelensky uses oppositional words to cement this contrast. The truth, he says, is on our side. While Russia is evil, it's not just an aggressive country, a vile invader, but it's a terrorist state. Evil is the message here. The contrast between them is amplified through the use of photographs, soldiers, men and women, wounded children, civilians, and of course the dramatic tone employed by Zelensky himself, a president who, as you know, used to be a professional actor. He goes a step further to conceptually assimilate Ukraine with Europe. The defense of Ukraine, he says, is a defense of Europe. And the culmination of this dipole, good versus evil, comes when he makes historical references to World War II. Remember Pearl Harbor, he said, addressing the American Congress. So essentially, the evil of World War II has returned to Europe. The references introduces a series of images with footage narrating the atrocities of World War II. So we have a direct analogy between Nazi Germany and modern Russia here that is insinuated. Besides Pearl Harbor, Zelensky also made a reference to the 2001 September 11 terrorist attack. So it's another analogy. In other addresses, he repeatedly uses the names of countries and country leaders, a scheme, a rhetorical scheme that generates similarity and proximity. My next frame is the responsibility of others to take action. Perhaps it's the most repeated message on the Ukrainian accounts during the first weeks of the war. They directly asked for a no-fly zone, arguing it would deter Russian aircraft and missiles. Now, neither NATO nor Europe appear to consider the option for obvious reasons, but it would be interesting to see if the call was sustained in later months. Further sanctions are requested on behalf of Europe and the West in general, but there is also an indirect instigation of guilt from posts portraying buyers of Russian energy as sponsors of war. And lastly, politics of fear are also engaged. The Ukrainian accounts associate the responsibility of Europe to take action with the seizing of a nuclear station in Zaporizhia, that was, by the Russian forces. What he said there is, if there's an explosion, it's the end of everything, the end of Europe. This is directly prominence of politics of fear. Ordinary people evolve into heroes, men and women who stand up to defend our state. Says Zelensky, there is a focus on women who take up arms, accompanied with photographs emanating a dramatic but positive sense of mass mobilization. Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine, the very familiar cry featuring in almost every video and every post. So I'll just move with next slides. Here's some examples. On the left, a snapshot of animated Putin bearing a Hitler mustache. This was actually a brilliant animated video on TikTok made by a Ukrainian agency for the government. I was not able to find out if it was paid or made pro bono. Companies paying taxes in Russia fund the death of children. Under the text, you can see many famous brand logos of multinational companies. And the best for last, I Have a Dream, the celebrated speech of Martin Luther King in 1963. Zelensky here paces with the American sensitivity on the civil rights movement and freedom. I don't know if the speechwriter here thought this would resonate more with the audience compared with, say, a national liberation argument. Moving on to the Russian frames and discourses, denazification, it is the perpetual refrain of the official narrative justifying what Moscow named a special military operation. Essentially, it's presenting it as an act of self-defense that was in line with the speech of Vladimir Putin on 24 February. And as many of you in the Faculty of Law very well know, Russia has invoked Article 51 of the UN Charter, which is something that is not communicated so much through social media. So Russia considers the Kiev authorities a neo-Nazi regime employing nationalists who committed atrocities since 2014 and continue to do so in the 2022 war, according to the posts. They post photographs depicting members of radical right, neo-Nazi organizations in Ukraine with recognizable Nazi insignia, flags, emblems, and admirers of the Ukrainian collaborator Stepan Bandera. Despite some visual contact here depicting civilian victims, the Russian accounts in general prefer to use political reasoning with supporting links, documentation, and external sources, reliable or not. This is all the more evident in their portrayal of the West as a promoter of fake news, an unreliable partner, with certain of its political officials being insane and Russophobic. So information, manipulation, and fabrication by the Kiev regime, as the Russian accounts suggest, are supported by Western governments, turning a blind eye to Ukrainian fighting methods and crimes committed by nationalists. In this sense, the Russian authorities present themselves as a target of misinformation by the trustworthy West, including the Western media. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, was very vocal of the Russian anger towards Europe. He said the EU is being dominated by the alliance, meaning the NATO alliance. There is no longer independence in Europe. This reflects the evolution of the Kremlin's political perception on the relations between Russia and Europe. They see the United States as its primary interlocutor before the Europeans and certainly before Kiev. In general, the Russian social accounts tend to demonstrate a sense of powerfulness and self-sufficiency using thorough argumentation, but also sarcasm. On the other hand, the strategy used by the Ukrainian accounts seeks to invoke emotion, demonstrating the victimization of the country and its citizens.
Alexander, ένα-δύο λεπτά για να κλείσουμε.
I'm almost there.
Okay.
So these are some posts about Russophobia. Again, they promote the sense of proximity. This is everyday life. This could be you. Crimea is Russia. The other message, a reflection of Moscow's historic and political perception of the Eastern Ukrainian territories and its people. The keyword here is reunification. So it indicates the ideology beneath. And another snapshot. This is a video of a young Russian athlete who addresses the famous Hollywood actor Schwarzenegger. It's not a mistake. The video was posted on the official Instagram account of Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So she uses a pop culture reference to address Arnold Schwarzenegger, who has supported the intervention in Iraq and Libya, making this analogy with the invasion in Ukraine. This sums up the discussion of my selected content. Ideally, the part of methodology I used could be reinforced by statistics, more data on engagement and content analysis, and of course, what we could consider is a bottomless pit of unconventional social media practices, troll forums, fake accounts, deepfake strategies. Obviously, powerful governments have the resources to tap into those. So there is no doubt that institutional use of social media in a war context has been a consolidated practice long before the Russia-Ukraine war of 2022. What has changed, though, over the years is the growth of the total reach of the main social media platforms, the content versatility, the ever-growing capabilities of streaming, sharing, interacting. Social media users create, modify, and circulate with content like never before, and they do it almost instantly. Videos of drones, buildings being shelled, tanks being destroyed, missiles being launched become part of the daily social feed. So this is why further research is required in a number of disciplines. Unfortunately, the war is not over yet, but when it is, perhaps a combination of tools and methods will help us assess what was the actual impact of social media content on the course of the conflict, if there is any. Even through mainstream media like television, the discourse of war gets filtered, it gets edited for all kinds of purposes. But through social media, war enters our very homes raw from the source. It bears a power that is unpredictable. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. We'll take any comments or questions after we finish. Last but not least, my colleague Michalis Kondos. His speech, his presentation is titled Perception of State Power in Small States, the Case of Cyprus. Michali, you have the floor.
Yano, I will make a breakthrough because we mainly because former president remaining of I will start now going back to the thank you very much. First of all, Um,
suggestion in the final article, because every day an episode adds in this subject. And the case of autocephaly of Northern Macedonia is an issue which I would like to add in the final article. And of course, as regards the soft power, the case of Patriarchate of Antiochia. I believe that this is a characteristic example where the Russian authorities found the patriarchate, and they influence all its decision. For example, Patriarchate of Antiochia did not participate in the Holy and Great Synod in Crete. Furthermore, Patriarch Ioannis does not recognize the new Ukrainian Church. And I suppose that he will be the last of the patriarchs, of the ancient patriarchs who will recognize the new church. Thank you very much once again.
Can we plus one more? It would be very interesting. Would you like to?
Yes,
I am playing the chair now because
Take the chair.
Yeah.
It's my chair. It's fine.
it's the time of presentation.
I don't know whether it's so relevant in what you said, but as an addition, I was going to ask what is the connection in a way, and whether it could play. And perhaps you could explain very briefly the stance of the Church of Cyprus, which brought division here as well. It was a very interesting presentation. I found towards the end this contradiction in a way very interesting, that the father of all these people actually supports the invasion while claiming that they are his sort of within his patriarchate and all the rest. Thank you.
Yanis noted that this is a very strong indication of the politicization of ecclesiastical affairs.
It's a very good example.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, shall I ask my questions to the rest of the speakers? The next one is for Alexander. Alexander, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes. Alexander, thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoy listening to presentations stemming from PhD work because being myself a master thesis and a PhD supervisor, such presentations give me what I want.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Therefore, I truly enjoy them. I have a question for you. You said...
I can't hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Now, yes.
Yeah. When you presented the limitations of your research, you said that there is no quantifiable data. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. Is there any way for us, any measurable way to define the impact of social media in contemporary international politics and security? Are there any theories, any models that can be used? I'm asking this because we can take it for granted that social media are reshuffling everything. But when it comes to international politics and security, and taking the example of ISIS, do we see any clear and measurable changes? Do we see any measurable impact in security and international politics?
Actually, yes, I think there is. It's a long shot, but it's probably a case-by-case scenario. You would have to ask lots of questions. First of all, there are tools to to quantify data and have all the statistics that you need to measure engagement, to measure reach, to measure how many people have seen a post, how many people have engaged. Now, if you can translate this to the taking of the decision or to the shaping of an opinion, that's a different story. But on a case-by-case scenario, it's obviously in the case of ISIS that you mentioned, it's easier because ISIS used social media to recruit fighters for its extremist cause, and there are already some research. There is already some research on this. Now, in the case of Ukraine and Russia, it's different. And there are other elements and parameters that have to be taken into consideration. For example, the transnationalization of the conflict worldwide through the media. That was not the case, for example, in the conflict of Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020. There was use of social media, but it was geographically restricted, and we are not. I can assume that the impact was not so great as in the case of Ukraine and Russia.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. Keep up with your very good work, and I wish you all the best for your PhD research and for the completion, of course, of your doctoral dissertation.
Thank you.
Now, although we are at the end of our time, a very brief question also for my friend and colleague, Nico Stelgias. Nico, also a very interesting presentation, which deals with a particular magazine and with the material that we can draw from that magazine. Personally, in the past, I had supervised a master thesis on articles deriving from another magazine, Turksoy, which is one of the magazines of the pan-Turkic movement. It seems that there are such hotspots in Turkish journalism. My question is, why do you choose this magazine? Maybe you have said it, but I missed it. What makes this magazine, Krider, so interesting for focusing on it and researching it?
My answer is pretty simple. It's about SETA. SETA is Ibrahim Kalın's and Fahrettin Altun's foundation, founded in 2006. It represents the neoconservative approach of Turkey and was labeled by some researchers in the western part of the world as neo-Ottoman, let's say, foreign policy. Ibrahim Kalın is the spokesperson of the Turkish presidency. He founded the SETA, and the SETA, just weeks before the failed coup, started to publish this, let's say, semi-academic, semi-journalistic medium journal. It is very interesting because it is a unique source in order to identify some aspects of the Erdogan's foreign policy from the source, from the source, keeping from the source. For us as researchers, I mean, okay, you have the newspapers, the medias, but they are speaking the people's language. This is semi-epistemonical, let's say, academic way of keeping the tabs about the foreign policy. And the conjecture, the historical conjecture of the journal is very, very interesting. SETA started to publish it just weeks before of the failed coup. And one of the articles, if I'm not wrong, was about the future of the Turkish army. They started in the big Turkey.
And then we had
the conjecture is very, very interesting. And just after the coup, the journal, as I tried to present, started to focus on Turkish Russian affairs and let's say the alternative search in the Turkish foreign policy.
That's a huge issue. I mean, I wish you had more time to elaborate further on how Turkish-Russian relations play out in the broader, and also Zoran Tsakiris made this point, in the broader foreign policy, in the contemporary conception of Turkish foreign policy.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am done.
Thank you very much, Mihaly. I think we must sum up here. We must close it because it's the closing 45 minutes of the roundtable discussion with the conclusions of the parallel session. So thank you very much, everyone who has presented, the commentators, for the questions and everything. So we conclude here, and I ask you if anyone wants to continue into the other room, the gray amphitheater, for the conclusions. Thank you very much.